This is Pixelated Audio, episode 116, and you're listening to the music of Gyruss. Welcome to Pixelated Audio, a podcast focusing on game audio, its history, and the people behind it. We're your hosts. I'm Gene, and this is Brian.
How's it going, everyone? Today we're going to be playing music and talking about Gyruss. This was kind of spawned from our Library of Congress talk. We started looking into the game and history and getting stuff prepared for our talk. And we figured, this game is really interesting. There's not a whole lot of music, so it's going to be a shorter episode. But it was something we were kind of passionate about and wanted to dig into a little bit more.
Yeah, it was kind of the turning point between old arcade music and sort of the newer 8-bit music.
Yeah.
It's based off of Toccata and Fugue in D by Bach, written around the 1730s. So we had that sort of classical music arranged for a new game. But at the same time, you can see that they're doing a little bit more with it than they would probably have done a few years earlier.
Right. That track that brought us in was the start intro and the main BGM 1 from the arcade version of Gyruss that was released in 1983. And this is an excellent arrangement, I think, for all the different sounds that we're getting out of those 5 PSG chips that are included in this cabinet.
Yeah, we talked about it on the earlier show at the library. This one still looks really good in arcades. Every time I load it up, it's just a joy to play.
Yeah. I think this track, too, is just so powerful, so strong. I mean, obviously, the composition is solid, right? But, like, the sound that these PSGs are producing together is just incredible. And I think just blasting, out of those speakers of the cabinet has got to be an amazing feeling. So 1983 is so early, but such a great sound.
I can only imagine how it would have felt.
All right, so Gyruss hit the coin-op market in 1983. It was developed by Konami and released by Century, who, with Stern, published a lot of their early titles overseas. It's a shoot-'em-up through the Earth's solar system where the player ship moves in a circular orbit around the outer edge of the screen while shooting enemies in the center. It's kind of like a cross between Galaga and Tempest, if you've ever played those. It was released in 2 different forms, an upright cabinet and a cocktail version, which looks really incredible. I'm a big fan of cocktail arcades. It reminds me of like playing games with my parents when we would go to like restaurants and stuff. Miss Pac-Man was a big one, and so anytime I see a cocktail cabinet, I just get this just warm sense of joy, and it's always makes me so happy.
I think I only ever really played cocktail cabinets at pizza parlors because that seems to be where they lived.
Yeah, that was kind of one of the places they lived. Now we had like the old spaghetti factory. That was one of the places that we would go to, and they had like Mr. Do in a cabinet, and we played that a ton. And anyways, good times, cocktail cabinets, and I mean, got one just downstairs in the garage. So if you ever want to play cocktail cabinet, come over and have a pizza at my house.
Sounds like a good idea. So we're not going to talk too much about Konami because we talk about them all the time. If you want to hear more about them, look at pretty much any number of episodes. Just search Konami on the website and you'll find, I don't know how many, 15 episodes we've talked about them.
At least, yeah.
So we are going to talk a little bit about the game designer, Yoshiki Okamoto. So Gyruss was designed by Okamoto, his second and last game for Konami after Time Pilot. After the release of Gyruss, he was let go due to a pay dispute and went on to work for Capcom. He designed Gunsmoke, Sidearms, and Forgotten Worlds. He was the producer for Final Fight and Street Fighter II, among many other titles.
It seems like a mistake, to let this guy go.
Yeah, I bet he probably said, pay me more, and Konami said no, so he went somewhere else where they would. So
their loss, Konami's loss.
Big loss. So in 1997, Okamoto founded his own company, Flagship, with funding from Sega, Capcom, and Nintendo. You might not know the name, but Flagship worked on a number of high-profile games, including many of the Resident Evil games, the Onimusha series, the Zelda Oracle games for Game Boy Color, the Game Boy Advance Zelda games, and their last game was Kirby Squeak Squad on the DS before Flagship was absorbed back into Capcom in 2007. So I've played a lot of those games, actually. I didn't even know about this company.
Me too. I never heard of Flagship. Well, there you have it, Okamoto.
So in 2003, Okamoto went off to found yet another company, Game Republic, which was best known for its Genji series of games on the PS2 and PS3. They're set in feudal Japan and have a similar playstyle to the Onimusha series. Game Republic also released the PS3 action game Folklore or Folk Soul in Japan, as well as the RPG Brave Story New Traveler on the PSP. Not as familiar with this era of output, but I've heard of a few of these games.
Same here.
In 2011, Game Republic shut down due to debt, and a year later, Okamoto announced that he had retired from making console games and began working on mobile games. In recent years, he created Dragon Hunter and Monster Strike for Mixi. Dragon Hunter was a moderate success, but Monster Strike became a major hit, going on to be one of the highest-grossing mobile apps of all time at around $7 billion, surpassing even Puzzles and Dragons.
Wow.
So I'd never heard of this game. Apparently it's much bigger in Japan, but I've heard of Puzzles and Dragons, and I knew that thing was just a cash cow for many years. So
yeah,
to beat that in sales, that's pretty impressive.
Well, Mixi, if you guys aren't familiar with Mixi, it's kind of like a social networking platform for Japan. It's kind of like MySpace was, and then kind of Facebook at the same time. But I think it started dying out maybe, I don't know, like 8-9 years ago. It's still around, but it's just not what it was. It was huge back then. Like everybody had a Mixi account. But yeah, I mean, that's to put it into context, like we had Farmville, I guess, on.
Yeah, I was just about to say Zynga had a lot of games in early Facebook, which they started to phase out. So anyway, do you want to get into some more music?
Yeah, so let's get into our next track. This is BGM 2, composed by Masahiro Inoue. That was Main BGM 2, composed by Masahiro Inoue for Gyruss in the arcade.
It's got a nice heavy gravitas to it based on the old Bach tune.
Yeah, this one is very powerful as well. I like this track. In fact, I mean, there's not many, and they're all good, but I like the classical section that comes in a little bit later on. The drums kind of taper off, and then they pump back up. I think that's a really powerful thing for this kind of circular spinning action game, right? You get these moments of relief and then back in the action. It's pretty cool.
I like the heavy choral cadences at the end, but I've listened to a lot of choral music over the years, so I guess that's no surprise. So for those of you who've never played Gyruss, this is the second of 3 tracks. The main tune is kind of broken up into stages, so it's kind of taken as one long piece of music. So we've just heard the second one right now.
Right. So let's talk about the composer real quick. Masahiro Inoue. He didn't spend a lot of time working on music, with Gyruss being his only major credit. He worked for Konami for a number of years in other roles. For example, he was the designer for Crime Fighters and produced for games like Slam Dunk 2, Violent Storm, Metamorphoforce, and Dragoon Might. He was also a voice in one of the characters in Martial Champions, and he was even listed as special thanks on the first Zone of Enders game in 2001.
Yeah, he was with Konami for a number of years, but as you can imagine, a lot of these early artists were just the first available programmer that knew how to program sound.
Yeah. But I mean, he did an excellent job, He really, he might have been, I bet you he was a classical music fan anyway, and he was able to kind of translate his passion into chip tunes, I guess.
Classical music is such an easy source of getting music. Even some modern games, like I was just playing Stacking a little while ago, and a lot of those tunes are just recordings of really old music, and it works so well.
Yeah. All that public domain stuff is so easy, and you can get away with it because it's so good anyway.
It's true.
You don't even have to be a classical music fan. I think it all works out. Anyways, so Gyruss was ported to a number of different consoles and home computers. And so this next track that we're going to play is from the C64 version. This is BGM 3 or Subtune 6.
That was Main BGM 3, arranged by an unknown composer for Gyruss on the C64.
This is Gyruss if Gyruss, the spaceship, was a helicopter. I don't really care for this track that much, to be honest.
No, I feel like the early C64 stuff, they hadn't figured out the chip, so it's kind of like, there's some cool tones there towards the end, but it's kind of a pretty straight arrangement.
Yeah, unfortunately, at the end is where I was the most curious. Like, oh, is it going to build up to something? And then it just kind of tapers off into nothing. But, I think it works for the game if it's just an action game. It's early. This was released in 84?
1984, yeah.
Yeah, so it was still pretty impressive, I think. And I actually played the C64 version. It's pretty good. It's a pretty faithful port.
There's a version for the 2600, 5200, the Atari 8-bit, the ColecoVision, and the C64, all released in 1984. I played a few of these versions. Even the 2600 version's pretty faithful. It's like solid single colors, but it plays pretty well.
Yeah, I think it's just a really good formula for a game that just translates well across any platform. It's very simple. I mean, you could almost make the game yourself with like sticks in the dirt, and like
it's almost that simple. Yeah.
But yeah, it was released for all these different 8-bit computers and home consoles, and most of them were developed by Konami. The 2600 was developed by Rockland, which is a company from Chicago.
That's right. Yeah, a US based company. In fact, A lot of these were published by Parker Brothers, the board game company, because there wasn't a lot of Western distribution for Japanese companies at the time.
Right. And video games,
yeah.
They're kind of like interchangeable back then, so it was just anything that was entertainment, so it makes sense. Now, there is a story here which is kind of strange, but in 83, like, I guess, if you're going to put all this money and time into making something, might as well put a little nice story behind it. So it goes 2.75 billion miles from home. Your journey from Neptune to Earth is threatened by 25 stages of attack by the evil Idioclan Empire, consisting of Exarcians, Paterions, Terrarians, Gagarians, and the bonus stages, Zigmas and Dogmas.
A lot of really clever sounding enemy names.
I was struggling through each one of those just now.
I think it's just prefix of like, Mega, Giga, Terra, and
something. But the gameplay is pretty straightforward. The main focus of the game is to fly through the solar system and reach Earth, hitting Neptune, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars along the way. And each time you reach a planet, there is a challenge stage where you try to destroy as many enemies as possible. It's really fun, adds a lot to the experience. Everything was about high scores and getting the most points back then. And so this was like that driving force that made you want to keep going and getting more or increasing your high score each time you play.
There's really not much to it, honestly.
Yeah, there's not much to it. After reaching Earth, there's a challenge stage followed by a very fast 3 warps to Neptune stage. After this, the levels and the background music start over. Controls are pretty straightforward. It's an 8-way joystick and a fire button. So joystick, 1 button. I miss those days.
You could pretty much put this in front of anybody and they'll figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, like even kids who have never played a game before, they can figure out 1 button, and that's
The 8-way joystick does take a little bit of getting used to because you kind of got to hold the direction you want the ship to go, and if it's moving, but it's still pretty simple after a few minutes.
It's still pretty simple. Anyways, so we talked about the early computer ports like the C64 that we just played. It was also ported to the Famicom Disk System and the NES. And so we're going to listen to a track here from Stage 1. This was arranged by Atsushi Fujio, Yuichi Sakakura, and Harumi Ueko.
That was Stage 1 for Gyruss on the Famicom Disk System, arranged by Atsushi Fujio, Yuichi Sakakura, and Harumi Ueko.
I like this version a lot. It's really, really good on the Famicom Disk System.
I think this is my favorite version of the episode of this track.
I think so too.
You're going to hear a few versions of it. I think not too many, but a few.
Yeah. And what an all-star cast that did the arrangement for this game, right? Like, we've talked about all these guys on the show before. They're all top-notch.
We'll talk about some of them in just a bit. But Gyruss was released on the Disk System in November of 1988 and February 1989 for the NES. The gameplay is a little bit different. It's more like a sequel than a port. Changes include improved graphics and music, additional songs, an intro and ending sequence, a super blaster weapon with limited charges, new enemies, extra stages, this time traveling through all of the solar system, including Pluto and the Sun, as opposed to just starting from Neptune, chance and bonus stages, mini-bosses on some stages, and main bosses at the end of others.
Yeah. The music is similar. It's the same theme, but the port over just works so well on the Famicom Disk System. Do you want to listen to just that channel real quick and see what it's doing? Because I know that this horn sound is doing the melody. That's rad. It's very brass sounding. I like that.
It shows what you can do with 5 or 6 channels really well if you know what you're doing, instead of 15 that it's just kind of like thrown in there.
Yeah, you know what it reminds me a lot of?
What's that?
Falsion.
Oh, yeah. And there's a reason for that, isn't there?
There is. So the first one, Atsushi Fujio, he worked on a number of different things, including Falsion, Biomiracle, Bokute Upa for the Famicom Disk System, Exciting Billiards. So we talked about him on the Falsium episode, which is an excellent soundtrack. Also did the Maze of Gallius, which we did a episode on as well. Did YY World and the Adventures of Bayou Billy, Jackal, Blades of Steel, and Lagrange Point as sound designer for that one. On the Super Nintendo and Genesis, he did some stuff as a sound designer, Contra 3, The Alien Wars, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters, and Castlevania Bloodlines. I mean, like, we've already nailed, 6 of these in different episodes already, so...
I'm pretty sure this podcast is just about him.
Yeah, just about him at this point, yeah.
So, Yuichi Sakakura, mostly a sound designer, but he worked on some pretty high-profile games. For the Nintendo, he worked on Top Gun, The Second Mission, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, The Manhattan Project, both for the Nintendo. Ganbare Goemon Gaiden 2, Zen Intergalactic Ninja, and also worked on Metamorphic Force and Beatmania 2DX 7th Style in the arcade. So not as many credits as some of the others, but
still, like, everybody recognizes some of these titles, especially Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2. The Famicom Disk System, or the Famicom and the NES version of those games are incredible, and that's what a lot of kids grew up playing because, not everybody had access to the arcades. And this was the perfect way to experience it in your home. And it was really fun ports.
They were. I played a bunch of the second and the third one.
Yeah, very good. And then we have Harumi Ueko, and he was a sound designer for Gradius 3 on the Super Nintendo, also The Legend of Mystical Ninja, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Tournament Fighters, and Turtles in Time on the Super Nintendo, Batman Returns, and Castlevania Dracula X, all on the Super NES. For composition work, he did SD Snatcher on the MSX, Gradius 4 in the arcade, Silent Scope 1 and 2 on the PS2 and Dreamcast, and many Bimani games under the pseudonym Jimmy Weckl, particularly Guitar Freaks and Drum Mania.
I wouldn't have recognized the name, but I have seen Jimmy Weckl a ton because I played a bunch of music games. We've talked about that on the show before.
I was really confused because I always thought that Harumi Ueko was female because of the name. It's a classic female name. And so when we realized it was Jimmy Weckl, I was like, oh, I was totally wrong this whole time. But hey, there you have it.
Yeah, and all the photos definitely corroborate that it's probably a guy.
Yes. Anyways, let's get into our next track. This is from Stage 2 for the NES version of Gyruss. All right, that was the Stage 2 music arranged by Atsushi Fujio, Yuichi Sakakura, and Harumi Ueko for the NES version of Gyruss.
It's a pretty classic Konami sound right there.
That's some straight tennis music, man.
I really like the NES version because it's clear they're paying respect to the original, but they're also kind of doing their own thing and branching out. So that's really one of the reasons why I think this is probably my favorite version of the ones that we're going to be playing today, at least, as a complete package.
This is really different. This doesn't strike me as a Gyruss track at all. I mean, it's not. It's not by Bach, but it's a really good track though on its own. I think that you do sacrifice the one of the square wave channels to take over the melody from the Famicom Disk System that was handling it prior. But this is just a great arrangement.
It's still pretty good arrangement, even on the NES. Fewer channels, but I like it a lot.
Yeah.
So Gyruss saw a few other ports. This is kind of an interesting one. There was a game called Konami 80s Arcade, which actually did release in arcades first and then on PS1. But it was one of these...
Wait, that's strange. So they made an arcade, kind of like an arcade classics in the arcade?
Yeah, it was one of these compilation things, well before all of these like MAME cabinets or anything. It was essentially just like their classic arcade games recreated. So they had Scramble, ER Kung Fu, Circus Charlie, Road Fighter, Time Pilot, some of the really early games. Mm-hmm. And this came out in 1998 in Japan. It was planned to come over to the West, but it never actually made it over in arcades. But it did come out in Japan and North America in 98, 99 on the PS1. A few years later, there was a GBA port, or a Game Boy Advance, 2002. Had a few extra levels. It was part of their Konami Collector Series, Arcade Advanced, which also had some early games like Time Pilot, Russian Attack, Frogger, Scramble. Musically, there wasn't really any difference. These were just straight arcade ports.
The Game Boy Advance version looks really good. It does. It does look really... maybe it's the screen resolution just pairs up well with it, but it looks very clean. I've tried it out a little bit. It looks great, spot on. You get you have a little bit wider screen on the GBA, so you have like stats on the side.
Yeah.
And I think you have that on the NES as well, right? I can't remember.
Because that's a different game. So, the
Yeah,
NES
that's
version's
true.
a little
Yeah,
bit more of like a home conversion, whereas the GBA one is a port. So, yeah, they kind of cheat. They give you the tall screen and the stats on the side, so you still have that tall vertical arcade aspect ratio, but
Right.
you don't lose anything in the resolution.
I played like 6 versions in the last like week, and so I can't. I'm mixing them up. But yeah, they also released a version on mobile phones in 2004. There's some kind of compilation that Konami threw together. They included Gradius, and I think it was a standalone game or app that you could download as well.
Yeah.
So not a lot of changes to the music, but they're good ports. Good way to play it if you got a Game Boy laying around. I really want a Game Boy Micro. This would be so rad. It would be like the size of a quarter.
Well, and you only get about half the screen, so it's even smaller than that. It's like a dime.
Yeah, true. Good point. So we played a track from the Famicom Disk System and the NES, but we haven't really done a direct comparison between two of the same track. So there's kind of a good example here that's short. It's the bonus music or that chance stage. So let's take a listen to the Famicom Disk System first and then jump over to the NES. So that was the bonus stage track or the chance stage track from the Famicom Disk System version. Let's jump into the NES version. So there's not a whole lot of difference as far as the melody or the guts of the track go, but having that warmer sound on the Famicom Disk System sounds so nice, so pleasant.
They did a good job with the NES, but I think in this case I do prefer the Disk System version. It does have a little bit of extra kind of, buzz or it's got an interesting sound to it. I really like it when it's used well, and I think Konami is one of the few companies that really takes advantage of it and kind of showcases it. Yeah, for sure. So one thing that's really cool about Gyruss is it really had this lasting impact. In addition to all of these ports that Konami made, it actually found its way into a few other games. For example, in Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, there's an arcade with this sort of Gyruss clone called They Crawl from Uranus. What's more...
It's a very GTA thing to do.
Of course, right? What's a little bit more interesting is on the PS1, Konami gave their license for Contra to Appaloosa, the guys who made Echo the Dolphin. They made Contra Legacy of War, and for no real reason at all, they actually included a complete port, whatever kind of hacked together version of Gyruss, which is it's kind of this little Easter egg that you can find in the middle of the jungle stage.
No kidding. On the from like the NES version, I guess.
Sort of. It's based on the NES version, but it's actually their own kind of made from their PS1 assets, kind of hacked together.
Huh.
There's also a combat clone in there. They just decided to throw these in there for no real reason.
That's strange. So Contra Legacy of War, that was on Saturn as well. Did that have the Easter egg too?
I'm pretty sure it did, yeah. I just saw footage from the PlayStation 1 version. And so what's odd is because it's playing during the middle of the jungle stage, we're actually going to be playing the music that you hear during it because it's technically what you hear while you're playing Gyruss.
Yes, I was against this, but we're going to listen anyway.
It's so far of a departure. It's just as weird to watch this game with this music in the background as it is just to hear it by itself. So let's listen to the jungle theme from Contra Legacy of War, composed by Attila Héger.
All right, that was the jungle theme from Contra Legacy of War that happens to play during Gyruss. You get one of those a year, Gene. You get one of those a year.
Hey, it's technically in Gyruss, right? Yeah, okay. In the loosest sense possible.
I'll give you that.
Well, I didn't want to play yet another version of that main theme just yet. We have one more coming up. So Attila Héger worked at Appaloosa, the company sort of most well known for Echo the Dolphin. He worked on Contra Legacy of War, The Lost World, Jurassic Park, the 97 version, See the Contra Adventure. He also worked on Wacky Races, and more recently he's been working on some of the Zen pinball games and Castle Storm even. So, yeah, some more recent stuff, as recently as 2017 for Pinball FX 3. So, still in the game.
Wow. Cool. Yeah, I'm not really familiar with his work outside of, I guess, well, now this. So, yeah, but some pretty well-known stuff.
Yeah, other than his more recent stuff, if you like the pinball games, Pinball FX or Zen Pinball, you probably would know him from the 2 Contra games.
I know Electric Boogaloo is a huge fan of the video pinball stuff. I am too, but not at his level. He's kind of a nut about it, but that's cool.
They're pretty good, but this was definitely just to throw in a bit of a curveball in the episode, you know.
Thank you, Gene.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
So,
no problem.
To round out the show, I will say a remixed version of the track from Gyruss appeared in DDR Ultramix 2 on Xbox in 2004, which was arranged by Jeroen Tolman. And probably the most recent release of Gyruss was the 2007 Xbox Live Arcade release, which had the option of using updated graphics, and it featured updated music by Jeroen Tell, a name we know and love.
Yep.
He's definitely a composer who's made the rounds over the years.
Yes. And so our next version is the Main BGM, arranged by Jeroen Tell for the Xbox 360 or XBLA. So let's take a listen. That was the Main BGM, arranged by Jeroen Tell for the XBLA version of Gyruss.
It's a pretty cool track. Nice little electro dance version. It hits all the high notes.
It's cool. It's cool. You know, I've heard this track like a million times now, but it's still fun to listen to. I like it.
And I have to be honest, I played this version a little bit. I played the demo. It's solid, but you know, it doesn't do all that much to update it from the originals.
It's like the original game with new sound.
Yeah, new graphics, and they're not like super amazing. It was kind of in that era when Konami was trying to just make ports. Like, I think there was Frogger and some of these other things, and they didn't really put that much time into it. It was one of the early Xbox Live Arcade games.
Right. They were just basically trying to cash in on some of their old stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it's fun. It's still like a good version of the game, but it's maybe not. It's not amazing anyway.
Yeah, no additional stuff there. Just go play it on Game Boy Advance or
play it on whatever version you can find. I mean, it's still a fun game to play today.
Totally. I love this game. I love it. And it was a lot of fun researching it for the Library of Congress talk because, I played Gyruss a lot when I was a kid, and I didn't really think of ever doing a show on it because it's just there's not a lot of music. It's good stuff, but how are we ever gonna tie it and track down all the information? Somehow we did it. So
I think the most interesting part is it just takes a lot of twists and turns and kind of goes through a lot of different hands. It had the life on the 8-bit Western consoles primarily, then it went to Japanese home consoles, then it went to these weird kind of arcade ports.
Yeah, there was even a clone of it that was released in the arcades about the same year too. They called it Venus.
Yeah, I didn't look into that one too much, but
it's the same game.
Yeah,
it's the same game.
For a game that really never evolved that much beyond like the NES version, it's surprisingly got a lot of longevity to it. People really like the original Gyruss. It's a good game. I mean, I don't blame them, but
it's like one of the top 100 arcade games or something of all time. It's like it's got to be up there, man.
Yeah,
it's a classic.
Kind of surprised though there wasn't a little bit more evolution of this kind of thing. But some games just kind of have that one form and they stick to it.
Yeah, like I don't know. I could see something really awesome, like I guess like a rehash, like a reboot of this game, like all modern now. And there's a lot of spin-offs, I think, that kind of follow the formula. So maybe that's all we're gonna get from it.
Of course, you probably saw more of the evolutions in like Tempest and TXK, all those Jeff Minter games.
That's the one. Tempest is like in fact, I probably played Tempest more.
I think so too. Although, to be fair, they're also not that different from their original versions. There's, I guess, only so far you can take that kind of game style.
Good point.
So,
yeah. Anyways, today we covered Gyruss in the arcade. We talked about the home consoles, the computers, and the more recent XBLA version. Had a lot of fun talking about the game, and hopefully this episode's on the shorter side. I have no idea. I'm not looking at the clock. But it's pretty late here, so I'm ready to wrap things up.
Definitely. Let's take this home.
Yeah, so if you want to know more about the show, you can find us online at pixelatedaudio.com for the show notes and our track list. We're also on Twitter, and we have a Patreon. If you like the show and you want to support us and help us keep putting out content, check out our Patreon and maybe pledge a few bucks.
Yeah, we got a lot of content to go through. We just released a music disc. We had another Konami game, Rackets and Rivals, really short, just like 5 or 6 tracks. We had, of course, our Library of Congress talk, which was a huge honor once again. And Dream Come True, Gabriel Knight, episode 110. Absolute favorite, and that memory is going to be with me for a long time to come.
Yeah. If you guys like the show, please leave comments or feedback on the website or a review on iTunes. We got one last track taken out the show. This is from the Famicom Disk System version. This is the ending track of Gyruss. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you back in a few weeks for the next episode.